Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Attempt Adventure Podcast, a podcast about finding adventure every day and making your life a little more interesting. From Boulder, Colorado, I'm your host, James Barrett, joined as always by my co-host,
Michael Desrosiers in Bangkok, Thailand. How's it going, James? You were sick this week.
I thought I might have the Rona, but I do not, so that's good. Nobody's been sick for 2 years.
You know, I actually read a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal the other day. My gosh, I sound like such an old man. I read a good article in the Wall Street in the Journal. Yeah, the immunity debt. And it was saying that because we've all been so cautious for these last 2 years, we've not developed antibodies to these common colds, common flus, common viruses that are going around. And that as soon as life returns to normal, we're going to be sick for like an entire year. We've accumulated an immunity debt. And so we haven't been sick. I've been sick very, very infrequently recently. But as soon as life goes back to normal, we're going to get slapped in the face by pretty much everything.
Yeah, and it was weird because I didn't feel sick. It was just more under the weather, just like I was kind of groggy and tired, but that was really it. My coworkers, we've had a little COVID outbreak at work, and so I was like, crap. But I am all okay.
Good.
No COVID, no anything really. Some just blah.
Yeah, I get you. I've been there.
Yeah. How have you been this week?
I've been okay. The weather's gotten really nice in Bangkok. It's been down in the high 60s, low 70s. Beautiful. Winter weather. You've been here in the winter. You know how it is. It's great.
Mm-hmm. It is really nice.
Yeah. It can get into the 50s, and it has. Not for very long, for a couple days a year. You know, everyone will wear their jackets and stuff. And man, I was out on an adventure, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. I was on an adventure yesterday, and it was like 75 degrees, maybe 80 degrees in the afternoon. And at one point, we were buying a ticket from this lady, and she was in her like beanie hat and a scarf. I'm like, okay, come on, lady, like that's overkill. Like I know it's not hot, but it's not cold. Like it's pleasant. It's beautiful outside. This is the same thing I would see in my students when I was teaching at the high school. The temperature would fall below 90, and they would suddenly bundle up in their jackets and their scarves and their earmuffs and their little mittens. I don't think they were really cold. I think part of that was that they had to wear a uniform every day, and that was their only time they could express their own like fashion sense was when it got a little bit cold.
Just hot.
It's like if you physically could tolerate a scarf, you would wear it.
Yeah, okay, I get it. I mean, right now it is currently 27 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius.
That is below zero because obviously zero is 32.
Mm-hmm.
As a transplant from the South, how are you faring?
I mean, my job's at a ski resort, and so it's a lot colder up there every day.
Right.
And so I've gotten kind of used to it. I've got appropriate clothing.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is. Obviously, I'm not as adapted as people that have lived here for a long time. But it's just one of those things where the cold doesn't... I've always liked the cold.
Yeah.
When it's cold, I'm like, you can wear a jacket and a beanie and you're comfy.
Yeah. I've always much preferred to be cold. But, I've got my own insulation. Let's be honest.
Same. I don't get near as cold as maybe really skinny people.
Right. Well...
But, so, no, I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
I'm enjoying it. We have a vehicle that's good for driving in bad winter weather, so that's good.
I have a kind of a dumb question that's been plaguing me. James, when you go to work, do you drive or do you take a ski lift? How do you get to your... Where is the ski resort? On what location of the mountain is it? Is it at the top? Is it at the middle? How does this work?
It's at the bottom.
It's at the bottom.
Yeah, it's at the bottom. I drive through town for about 5 minutes, and then I go up through a canyon for 4,000 vertical feet.
Would this be similar to the one that you and I stayed at in Vail? Now, that was summertime, but is it kind of like that?
A lot smaller.
Okay.
A lot smaller.
But like down in the valley kind of area.
Yeah. It's at the bottom. So we have the 2 ski lodges that we have at the where the lifts are, and so that's where I work. I don't have to. So I drive up there, and I don't have to take a lift or anything.
That's too bad.
I know, that'd be kind of cool. I mean, I guess I could, but I would just there'd be no reason.
I don't really have any experiences with ski resorts. My only experience at a ski resort was that time that you and I were traveling in Colorado when we stayed at that one in Vail, and we ordered waffles from room service, and at the middle of the night, the fire alarms went off. We had to evacuate, and we never got our waffles, and we've always secretly blamed ourselves for that.
Yeah, I do blame myself for that. I do believe it was our waffles that caused the kitchen fire.
Yeah.
I mean, I know logically the time frames don't add up, but still, I blame myself a little bit. Because I know other people had gotten room service that morning.
Ours never
and they
arrived.
got their breakfast. We never got our waffles.
Yeah. Well, that was a terrifying moment. You wake up in the middle of the night with a fire alarm blaring. You're very confused.
Oh, yeah. And then you have the other guy you're staying with ask if he has time to go to the bathroom.
Josh listens to the podcast. Hey, Josh.
Does he?
Yeah.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah, shout out
How's
to Josh.
How's it going, buddy? I remember that night very vividly. Sleeping good, then all of a sudden you're woken up by a fire alarm and you leave your nice warm room to a 30-degree night.
Yeah, it was like June and it was 30 degrees. Colorado is so weird.
That was a fun trip. I enjoyed Vail a lot.
So anyway, buddy, have you done anything new or adventurous this week?
Unfortunately, no. I've been a little sick. So, no. So, go ahead. Do your worst.
You had the funk. You know what? I'm going to be forgiving. You do get a penalty, of course, because that's how this game is played. But it's going to be a gentle one. I'm going to relive one of our old monthly challenges. Your challenge this week is simply to have coffee outside.
Perfect.
Well, James, this week, I had an adventure.
Oh, yeah.
My wife and I went out of town with a friend of ours on a day trip. We went up to Saratburi province. So we went and we saw this temple, this mountain temple. We went to a fruit farm. We went to a really amazing coffee shop. And we went to a dam, like at the government's, what was it called? The Energy Generation Authority of Thailand. They have a power plant where they had a bunch of windmills and a big dam where they generate water power, I guess hydroelectric. And they have a bike track that goes around the dam. And so we rented bikes and we rode around the dam. The air was clear. It was a bit cool. It was gorgeous out that way. And I'm going to share a few photographs with you, James. And these are the same ones I'm going to put on the website. Why don't we go ahead and get into the episode? We've got a really good episode today. My younger brother, Kyle, who's been a guest on the show, I think twice before, is back. He and I were just having a conversation about crazy forms of transportation that we've both been on. He's quite an adventurer as well, mostly in the Middle East and Europe. So here's our conversation about transportation all around the world, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Desrosiers from Tel Aviv, Israel. Oh, what are you drinking? What have you got today?
You instructed me to make a cuppa, but I didn't just make a cuppa, I made a French pressa. So I have some Arabic coffee from the old city of Jerusalem. It's made with, I think it's cardamom. In Hebrew and Arabic, I think they call it hayel. And I think it means cardamom, but like it has this distinctive smell, this aroma.
Well, very good. I've got Captain Morgan.
I see that it's light outside still, but that's okay.
It's almost 5 o'clock somewhere, and that place is here.
If it was 5 o'clock in Israel right now, it would be pitch dark. The sun's going down at like 4:24. Isn't that horrible?
Today, I am joined for the third time by my younger brother, Mr. Kyle Desrosiers, live from Tel Aviv, Israel. The city on the sea, right? Does it have a nickname? Is there, how like a lot of cities have a nickname, like the Big Apple, or?
Yeah, it has a couple of nicknames. Well, first of all, thanks for welcoming me back. It's always so much fun to be a guest of your show. Well, Tel Aviv, they call it I guess, so it comes from the vision of Theodor Herzl, the Alt Neuland, the old new land. So Tel is like a built on top of a mound of ruins, and Aviv is like spring.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a Hebrew version of like the German Yiddish Alt Neuland. So it's part of the vision of rebuilding the Jewish society in Israel. And so they call it like Alt Neuland, or there's a part of the city that's very historic that has all these pretty white houses with shutters, and they call it the White City. They call it the non-stop city when they're trying to market to the tourists.
Anyway, Kyle, I'm very glad that you're here. I'm very glad that you've joined me again today. Well, Kyle, today we're talking about transportation, because when you're traveling, you're very likely not going to be driving around in your own car. Obviously, you can rent a car, but when you're on vacation, when you're on an adventure, you're often not going to have your own vehicle, and you might have to rely on public transportation. So today we're talking about interesting, unusual, different types of public transportation. You were running a few minutes late today because you were having to catch a bus. So let's talk about that first. Is that your kind of go-to? Is that the public transportation that you take the most? Or what is the public transport that you take the most in Tel Aviv?
Well, the bus is the only, really the only. I mean, there's a few other options, but it's the primary mode of public transportation here. They're building a huge subway. They have huge scheme of it that they've developed with many lines. Some of it's going to be light rail. Well, it may all be light rail. I don't really know, but some of it's above ground and some of it's below ground. It's going to occupy a whole lot of space,
Cool.
Reaching a whole lot of the greater Tel Aviv area. And, well, it's probably not going to be done for a long time. They were supposed to have something done by 2020. Now they're supposed to have something done by 2022. Finally, though, you can see visible signs of the entrances to the underground stations in some parts of Tel Aviv.
Nice.
Which is cool.
You know, like when I first got to Bangkok, there were just 3 lines, and there was a subway that was shaped like a C, and there were 2 SkyTrain lines, and now those 2 SkyTrain lines reach like 3 different provinces. The subway has become an entire loop. There's also the purple line, there's the gold line, there's the red line, there's a yellow line that's almost done. So suddenly, once they really put their minds to it, it just goes up fast. You know, I'm amazed at how fast the Bangkok public transportation has gone up, and I don't drive here. I'd much rather take the subway or even the bus, and so I rely on the public transportation all the time. Today, we are going to talk about public transportation. Now, I've chosen 5 that I've actually been on that I really like myself. I don't know how you've done it, if you've chosen, whatever. But we're going to talk about public transportation, and we're each going to talk about 5 that we are particularly interested in. Would you like to start us out today with your first? What kind of public transportation are you going to talk about?
Okay, well, let me just also tell you, I made 2 lists, actually 3 lists. The first list is the list of the top 5 experiences, but I could just do 2 or 3. The second list is the list of, I was thinking 3 or 4 really bad experiences with transportation.
Okay.
And the last list is the ones which I'm hoping to travel on. One of them is in Israel, so I think I can do it, but a couple of them are in Germany or Japan, or so that's what I'm thinking now.
What list would you like to start us off with?
I guess the best. We can do the best first then.
Okay.
The coolest transportation, I think, is always going to be the Klong boat in Bangkok.
Oh, that's actually my number 1.
Well, great minds think alike.
Yeah.
There's just nothing like it. Think a lot about the story of how your colleague fell into the Klong one time, and I think of how it's so different from these public transport systems that you have in the center of Bangkok, in modern metropolises, because you're stepping over a gap of water into this boat, and you have to avoid getting splashed, and you have to sit on the wooden bench through the canal, and it's a special experience, and a funny one too, especially traveling with mom, and she's a little bit worried she's going to get wet, and it feels like a roller coaster a little bit. So I do have a fond memory of the Klong boat.
Yeah, the Klong boats are super fun. They're these canal boats, old canal boats. They're stinky, they're smelly. The water is stinky and smelly, but they're very fast, and they cut across the city, avoiding all the traffic. Yes, unfortunately, one time, to my great shame, my management job, I accidentally lost an employee in the waters of the canal.
You were in charge of showing new employees, new to the country, right?
She had arrived fewer than 12 hours before. She had arrived the night before, and I was taking her around town, and we had taken her to get her phone unlocked at this shopping mall, and it was going to be a couple hours. So I said, okay, well, let's take the Klong boat up to the Golden Mount just to pass the time while we're waiting. I guess she was jet lagged because before the boat had even... we went to the Golden Mount. It was great. And we were coming back, and we were going to get back off just outside of the Jim Thompson house. And I guess she was jet lagged because before the boat was docked, before they told us to get off, she just stood up and stepped right off the side of the boat into the water. And there was a solid meter, maybe 2, of water. Like, it was not time to get off. That was entirely on her. But she just went right under. And she was under for quite a while, and I kind of leapt across to the other side. So I am proud of myself for this because I felt like such an action hero. I was on the dock now. The entire boat pulled back out because they didn't want to run over her. It was a while before she came back up from the water.
Were you debating diving in?
I didn't want to dive in. I was like, ooh, like one of my...
It's pretty dirty.
One of my greatest fears in life is brain-eating amoebas. I was really reticent.
I hope she went to her doctor afterwards.
She's fine. She's totally fine. She's still alive today, and it's been almost a decade.
Glad to hear it.
She's fine. I almost did. I was like, what do I do? And then she kind of spluttered to the surface. And now here's the thing. To get off of the dock, it's probably 2 feet, okay? And they have these big tires that are there kind of as floats. I was not strong enough to pull her up. And she really wasn't helping, to be fair. She was just kind of laying there like a sack of potatoes.
I'm sure she was in shock, too.
Probably so, but I couldn't pull her up. And so like 4 or 5 Thai men kind of ran up. They pushed me out of the way. They finally pulled her up. This poor girl. Luckily, her phone wasn't with her because she was getting it unlocked, so it was still at the shopping mall. But they just kind of like ushered her away to some little wooden huts off by the canal. And I'm there with this other girl who had also just arrived, Kate, who was a good friend. And she and I were just kind of like staring at each other in shock, like, what just happened? What are we supposed to do? And so they took her away to this little hut, and everyone was so sweet and kind. Like all these people, like these little ladies that lived in this area kept trying to bring towels and clean clothes for her. Finally, they brought her this, what I can only describe as a moo-moo. And so she had to put on this moo-moo, soaking wet, and we had to go into the shopping mall and get her phone. And she, I don't think ever forgave me for that day.
How embarrassing. I'm sure she never forgot it either.
I never fell in the Klong. I love the Klong boats. They are my favorite way. Not only the Klong boats, but just the river bus. The river bus that goes up and down the river.
Yeah,
in downtown
we did that too. Mm-hmm. We did that too, but I guess that's a little bit more modern, so it's less of the...
Yeah, in a way, I do take that. And the fun thing about that in Bangkok, I think, is that it's a genuine form of transportation. It's not purely for tourism like in some cities. It's just a convenient way to get around town. And yeah, there's tourists on it, but there's a ton of people that are just workers, guys from the Navy office going to work, and businessmen and soldiers and policemen and whatever. Just a good mix of just genuine people. And it's convenient. So, yeah, that's mine as well. So what else have you got? What other stories? I'm sorry, I kind of monopolized that with my story about she, who I will not name for legal reasons.
Well, no, I'm glad you shared it, and I'm glad it can be preserved in this podcast, because I always love hearing this story. Okay, so number 2, maybe we can take turns. My number 2, I would say, is in Ankara, Turkey, which, I was studying there when I was 17 on the summer program. It's a very hilly place. It's a bit like Jerusalem in that regard. They kind of remind me of each other. Lots of hills. It has a telepherique. It's like the cable car in the sky on the rope. And because you can call it a gondola or a cable car or I don't know what else. But like in Turkish and in French probably in Spanish, teleferic is like, I think, very specific to what it is. And I just don't think you have this word in English, but I wish you did.
Oh, cable car. I think people understand cable car. I think people know what
cable car is also what you have in San Francisco on the ground.
Okay, well then a gondola. Call it a gondola. You're right about that.
Okay, but a gondola is also what you have in Finnish.
Okay, well,
so in Turkey, in Ankara, this teleferic, this gondola, goes to the northern part of the city where it's really hilly. Other words, in the city they have underground subways, but here they have the cable car, the gondola, and it has maybe 6 or 7 stops, maybe 4 or 5. It's probably 4 or 5. It's quite small because also it takes a lot of space and a lot of engineering to build the stations and the posts. And so I actually rode with my classmates a couple times just for fun. We really had nothing to do in that neighborhood. It was a very residential part of Ankara. After our class, we would just go and explore, and we didn't have that much to do. It was summer, and our only responsibility was the Turkish class. And we would go to the station at the cable car, and you could ride it. And it doesn't stop. It's one of these things where it doesn't stop. So you get on when the doors are open, and it just keeps going.
Right.
Closes the doors, and then it takes you to the next station, and it's free. It's like the one transport that's free. And one day, it was during Ramadan, and they have Ramadan pide, the Ramadan bread, which is like focaccia almost.
Okay.
And we bought some ice cream, and we bought some Ramazan bread. We made ice cream sandwiches. And my friends, we're like 17, we think it would be fun to take them onto the train, even though you're not supposed to eat on the train, on the cable car. And so we're eating our ice cream sandwiches in there. Unfortunately, we were joined by some grandmothers, some Turkish grandmothers. So we had to hide our ice cream sandwiches behind our backs, because we didn't want them to judge us. And that's really the extent of the story. But I really thought that was a very cool form of municipal transportation.
Yeah. I've never heard of a gondola as municipal transportation. I mean, I've taken them. There's a gondola in Hong Kong that goes up to the Big Buddha. There's a gondola. There's one in Thailand. There's one gondola in Thailand that is in Hat Yai that goes from one mountain peak to another, where there's sort of a temple shrine area. But I've never heard of it as an actual sort of genuine form of municipal transportation. That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. Usually they're just more at tourist sites at the places I've been.
And what is your number 2?
My number 2 was actually in Bagan in Myanmar. It's an incredibly rural little town, but it's full of thousands of these tiny, tiny temples or shrines. Thousands. And, you look out across this sort of muddy field, and as far as your eye can see, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these little stone temples. There's no real paved roads. There's no train. The only way to get there is by I guess you can take a bus, but we took the boat to get there. But when you're in the town, the most iconic and really the only way to get around is by horse cart. Horse-drawn carriage. Yeah. And it is just so much fun. So when we were there, my wife, but my girlfriend at the time, my wife and I, we hired this man. His name was Mr. Bobo, and he had a horse named Nanda, who was very sweet.
Oh.
And they took us around. Basically, you're just like, hey, show me the best places. We didn't know what we wanted to see, but Mr. Bobo, he's a local. He knew the coolest places, and he was able to take us around from site to site for a full day. And it was a lot of fun. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it genuinely transports you back in time to be walking around these ancient temples. And then when you're done exploring, you go and you sit in the back of a wooden horse-drawn carriage to go to the next station. I mean, there's no cars or anything like that. People had motorbikes, but there were no taxis.
So maybe it feels a bit more like a pilgrimage, right?
It really did. Yeah, that was, who knows what it's like nowadays. That was several years ago. And I know that Myanmar has really developed in the last couple of years. Anyway, at the time in this historical park, the horse carts were really the only way to get around. And it was a ton of fun. It was the most fun I've ever had going from point A to point B. So that was my second one, is the horse carts of Bagan, Myanmar.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Let's see. So, I definitely want to move on to the horrible experiences so I can get my moment to complain.
What are your worst transport experiences? I would say any metro I've ever been on in the United States. The New York Metro is terrifying. There's no railing. You could just fall right on the track if you want to. There's like
I
people
love that
urinating
thing.
on the side of the road.
It's
People
gross.
trying to like sell you stuff. It's horrible.
Okay, well, I can tell you 2 recent experiences that I had. One happened just recently. I had gone to Ramallah, which is in the West Bank, which I didn't tell anybody I was going because I didn't want them to worry. And I had never been there until I had gone. And I went with my friend, and she was from Germany, and we had a very nice day. We went to a gallery, and we went to a restaurant and a cafe called Sufi Cafe. We were trying to get back, and it was getting dark. We were trying to figure out where the bus was, and actually our phones weren't working there either. We were in this bus station, which was kind of like an outside parking lot with like a tent sort of, and the bus never came. And we were trying to get back to Jerusalem, and it was getting dark. We were starting to get a bit nervous because, we haven't been there before, and we don't really know what to expect. And of course, it's a very tense place. And we also don't want people to know that we're from Israel, right? Like it could be dangerous or at least unpleasant. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but you could certainly have very unpleasant encounters with people,
right?
Very combative encounters, and well, I didn't want to do that. We're like talking to some older women, trying to ask them, and they were like, "Yeah, the bus will be coming soon." And we speak to the guy who's like working for the bus company, and he's like, "Yeah, like in 10 minutes." And then we wait, and I buy a coffee, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, in 10 minutes." And then we wait, and then we like talk to some lady, and she's like, she's like from there, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Like she's like talking to the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, 10 more minutes." And it's been like an hour and a half. And then like this like group of teenage guys like comes up, and they're like trying to flirt with my German friend, and she's very uncomfortable, and I don't exactly know what to do. And we're trying to like avoid the situation, but we're just ready to go, and it's getting cold, and we're really hungry, but we don't want to buy food. And finally, after hours, the bus comes, and in the meantime, we had a really nice experience. We made friends with these 2 Palestinian girls who are like 20 something, and they were talking to us, and they both spoke really good English. And they were like, the only reason that the bus came is because you tourists are here. And like the guy at the bus station like called them, and they were like, if it was just us, the bus probably wouldn't have ever come. And so the bus was like 2 or 3 hours late because the tourists are there. And
Wow.
I was very, very thankful to get home. But that was my recent experience.
Right. That's an amazing story. That's a lot of fun. I think one of the mottos of this podcast is that adventures begin when things go wrong. And so I always ask our guests about when things go wrong. And it's true, right? That's when the real stories come. Nobody wants to hear about your perfect day. It's not a fun story. Every story needs conflict. That actually is really interesting because the next one on my favorite public transportation could be considered a negative as well. And it is the Tokyo Metro. And the reason that it is, I love it because it's fantastic. It's huge. It goes everywhere. It's exactly what you imagine when you think about the Tokyo Metro. If you go early in the morning, around 8 o'clock in the morning, there's these little guys with white gloves who have to physically push you to get you on the train.
Wow.
Because it's such a crowded system.
And so they pushed you? Did they really push you?
They do, yeah. They shove you. They cram you literally into the subway cars so that you fit like sardines.
I can't imagine ever feeling comfortable being that close to people in my life after Corona situation.
If you are in Tokyo and you go around in the morning, around 8 o'clock in the morning, around rush hour, if you're in the station, the train comes, you can't be like, "Oh, I'll wait for the next one." No, you have no luxury to do so. The attendants will come with their little white gloves and shove you until you fit. And you'll be there like a sardine with 1,000 other people zipping along. But the Tokyo Metro itself is fantastic. It goes everywhere. It goes everywhere in Tokyo. You need it to go. The problem is it is an incredibly Byzantine system. The ticketing system pretty much everywhere in Japan is pretty confusing the first time you try to use it. And once you get a hold of it, it does make sense. But the first time you try to use it, it can be very confusing. They give you these little rectangular slips of paper that count as tickets with a hole punched in one end. And if you make a mistake, you have to try to go and adjust it. But I don't know. I had it on my list of favorites, but it could very easily be a negative as well.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that way on the New York or the Chicago subways, which are both very dirty. And my imagination is the Japanese one is at least a little bit cleaner.
Oh, it's pristine.
Maybe it gives you empathy for these animals who are like in these, in the roosters in the rooster house where they're turning them into meat. Maybe it will motivate you to be a vegetarian. I don't know.
Do people turn roosters into meat? I've never heard of roosters.
Hens?
Hens.
They turn hens into meat? Well, okay. Anyways, this isn't public transport because in Cyprus, they have only had public transport for the past, I don't even know, 5 years. And I just got back from Cyprus for the conference I was giving a paper at. It was my first time to go there. And they have public transport, but it's really, if in Israel, it's okay, and in the West Bank, it's really bad, and in Cyprus, it's very, very bad. And so that's a whole other story, but that's not what this is about. This is about the time when I was in Cyprus, and I was staying with this man called Yoda Juice, who is an artist from Cyprus, a film producer, and he was involved with the festival, and so he was a friend of this woman who knew the person I was working with on my presentation. And so he was very generous to let me stay in his house, which was very amazing. It was beautiful, modern house. Obviously, he was quite successful in his endeavors. And he had a brand new Lexus SUV. And one day I told him, I would love to go to the mountains. I didn't ask him, by the way. I told him I wanted to go to mountains, and I just wanted his advice to help with the bus routes and how can I figure it out. And he was like, it's okay. You can borrow my car. You can drop me off at work. It's all right. And I was like, first of all, in Cyprus, they drive on the left, and I have literally never in my life done that until then. Second of all, it's a brand new Lexus SUV, which is the most expensive car I think I've ever driven in. And so I didn't really know what to say, but I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? But he was like, yeah, just do it. You're only here once, you've got to make the most of it. And so for 10 minutes before he went to work, he was teaching me how to drive this car. And thank God it was an automatic transmission car, because that would have added in a whole other layer. But he was teaching me to, because I was driving on the left side of the road,
right,
but the steering wheel is on the right. And I was doing it on these little country roads. And every time a car would come, I would whoosh, veer to the side because it was so scary that a car would be coming at me from this other direction.
From that angle, right.
And I kept having close calls when we were practicing. And I was very close to just saying, let me hand him the towel. I was so embarrassed because I felt like he was worried. He made me feel like he was worried, the same way that Dad made me feel that he was worried whenever I was practicing driving with him when I was 15. But he was a lot less scarier than Dad. He was very gracious. Not that Dad is scary, but he was scared for his life, Dad was. So maybe that's why he was a bit grumpy with my driving. But anyways, my friend Yoda Juice was like, you're going to get the hang of it. It's fine. Just be careful. And then he's like, take me to work. I'm going to be late.
Mm-hmm.
So now I have his car, and I was going to drive 90 kilometers to Troodos, to the mountains in the center of Cyprus, to this village that I had read about. And so I am going on the highway. Before I know it, I'm driving on the left. I enter onto the highway, and well, you can imagine the highway is actually a bit easier than the 2-lane traffic.
More
right?
of a straight shot, right?
Yeah, and so I begin to get comfortable going the speed limit, and it's not that bad. At a couple of intersections, I had some kind of spooky experiences because you have to go opposite. They had a lot of roundabouts, and you have to go the opposite direction that I'm used to. And to enter and to exit the highway, you have to do it on the opposite side. And when people were passing me, I was a little disoriented. But I got the hang of it.
Cool.
But I didn't have a functioning SIM card, so I didn't have a functioning GPS. So I had an old school map. And I got to the village I was going to. I had Granddad's old camera. I was taking pictures. and I wanted to do some hiking. So I was like, oh, this is an easy map. So I got back in the car after I ate something in the village, and I was trying to find this hiking trail in the mountains. And I was like, I just go, it looks like I turn right here, and then it'll be easy to find it. And so I'm like trying to figure it out on these winding country mountain roads, and it's very beautiful, like farms and vineyards and hills, and it's very green, whitewashed buildings with red roofs, old style hotels, things like this. And I don't find the trail, and then I look at the map, and I don't even know where I am on the map, and I look at my cell phone, and of course it doesn't work. But I do know that this isn't the hiking trail, and I try a few different turns, and I don't find the hiking trail. I try to turn back. I don't find my way back. I keep going. I was like, I'll just have to rejoin the main road. So I look, and I think I find the sort of circular route that will take me back.
Right.
And I have wasted a bunch of time by now, and I don't even really have much time for my hiking because it took me so long just to get out to the village. So I kind of made a few pictures at the Outlook and kind of gave up on my hike. But then I was like, okay, I have to get back to Yorgis. There'll be traffic during rush hour. I have to go back to Nicosia, the capital, where he's working.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, let me follow just the metal signs on the highway. And I find a sign after turning and turning and turning. I find a sign for Nicosia. And I say, okay, that's great. And then I'm headed toward Nicosia. And I realize, where he works, first of all, if I just follow the directions to the city, that's not going to take me to where he works. And in all my planning for the day, I didn't remember where he works, the location of his office, his studio for his film company. And I don't even have a way to call him or text him. I'm like, okay, I'll just get close to Nicosia, and I'll go to the gas station, and I need to fill up gas anyways, and I'll use their Wi-Fi, and I'll call him. But I didn't even know how to get to Nicosia. And I thought the sign that said Nicosia would take me there, and it did, but it was some long roundabout way, and it ended up taking me on this road that was so narrow, only one car could go on it, and it was through all these hills which were covered with burnt trees. There was a huge, terrible forest fire, and I couldn't turn around. There was nowhere to turn around. The road was too narrow, so I had to keep going, and I don't even know where I went. I made a journey, a pilgrimage through the country, and I was an hour and a half late by the time I finally made it to Nicosia. Finally made it to a place with Wi-Fi. Contacted him, and he was like, it's okay, I figured. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get some gas in your car. I'll come to you. And so he gives me his address. I put it into my GPS in my phone. And then I realized stupidly that I had the right street and the right number, but the wrong zip code or whatever.
Right.
So it took me to that place in a whole other part of town, near the border fence with the Turkish part of Cyprus. And I was like, oh gosh, and now I don't have Wi-Fi, and I'm panicking. I'm even later. So I go into some bakery, and I go in, and I'm like, I have to park the car illegally because there's no parking spaces, and it's entering rush hour, and I'm still in the downtown area, even though I should not be in the downtown area because he doesn't work there. But that's just where I follow the signs to. And I go to some bakery, and I didn't even know a word of Greek. Well, they do speak very good English, though. And so I go up into the bakery, and I'm like, do you have Wi-Fi? I need your help. And this lady's like, no, we don't. I'm sorry. And I'm like, please, is there something you can do? And she's like, okay, just use my phone, blah, blah, blah. So I take her hotspot. I put the thing in my phone. I find the right address, and I buy something from her. I'm still really late. And finally, I'm almost there. And I keep missing my highway turn. So I had to make 3 U-turns to find the right highway turn. Finally get back to my friend Yorgis. I'm so exhausted, I don't even want to drive his car back to his house, which is 5 minutes away. So I say, I'm going to kiss the ground, and you can just drive from now on. And I'm so sorry. And thank God I didn't crash your car. So that was my latest debacle in a car that was way too fancy for me. And I don't even know if it was legal, to be honest with you. But that shows you another instance of Cypriot hospitality and generosity. Well, that's what happened, and that was my day, and I didn't even get my hike.
Oh my gosh, what a disaster. What an absolute disaster.
I felt so stressed.
Yeah, I've been living in a left-hand driving country for almost a decade, and I have had a driver's license, and I have never sat behind the wheel of a car.
Ever?
Never, not once. I've had a driver's license.
Not even to get your
No, I didn't. You know what? I've literally never taken a driver's test in my life because for my American driver's license, mom and dad signed off and I just got it. And for my Thai driver's license, I used my American driver's license that said I already knew how to drive. However, I'm a very good driver. I'm the only person in our family who's never had a ticket. So that might be because I spend like 10 months of the year not driving. I only drive when I'm home.
Yes.
Regardless. But no, I do not drive here. I'm not brave enough. It's confusing. I still get a bit car sick if I sit on the right-hand side in a passenger seat.
No, I hear you. Well, look, Thailand has like 50 million people? How many? Do you know?
Let's see.
Cyprus has 300,000 in the whole country.
Right.
So it's a little bit different. And a little bit more forgiving than Bangkok would be, I think.
Yeah, Bangkok has 10 million just in Bangkok.
Yeah. So Cyprus is not as scary.
Right.
And it was still pretty darn scary.
Man, well, my next one is a really pleasant experience where almost nothing could go wrong.
Famous last words.
Yeah, it's the Hong Kong Star Ferry. It's part of their public transportation. If you have a Hong Kong Octopus card, you can just, use the ferry just like you would use a metro. It's this old ferry that goes back to the 1890s. It's very cool. It crosses Victoria Harbor. There's actually a subway that goes under it really fast, but they keep the boats running just kind of for charm and atmosphere. Old wooden boats, and they're kind of slow, and they just chug lazily across Victoria Harbor from Kowloon to Hong Kong Island. Every time I'm in Hong Kong, I have to ride them multiple times. I pretty much refuse to take the subway, the MTR, because why would I? If you've got this fun boat, it gives you the best views of both Kowloon and the Hong Kong Island. It's just so much fun. And it's a vital part of their current public transportation network. I mean, maybe it's a bit outdated, maybe it's a bit old-fashioned, but, that's kind of the characteristic charm of Hong Kong as a city.
Well, I would love to ride on that someday. I love boats.
It is not scary. It is not stressful. It's not nearly as terrifying as driving on the wrong side of the road. It is just the most relaxed and chill ride you'll ever take, and you kind of feel sad when it's over.
Well, that reminds me. And now I think we're kind of blurring the list between fun and crazy and scary and stressful. But I'm happy for all of these experiences.
Right.
As long as nobody gets hurt, it's part of why you travel, how you remember, how you form bonds with people who are from the places, and how you form bonds with people with whom you're traveling, even when things go wrong. One thing I remember, I was just thinking about it, is also Thailand. One of the kind of really scary, fun transports is when you and Mom and I had gone to the elephant preserve, the park in near Chiang Mai.
That was such a fun experience.
Well, what stood out to me, of course, it really was lovely when we walked with the elephants. We got to feed them as we journeyed through the jungle. It was crazy, a whole other world. But I also distinctly remember when we sat in the back of the truck, and we were in the hills, the slopes, the mountains, foothills of Chiang Mai. And it's I don't know if it's a song tao is the word for it, but it was the bed of this truck. And I think it was all of us tourists. It was our guide, maybe a couple of dogs. I don't know. But we were in the bed of a truck.
Yeah.
With no seatbelts, no seats.
It was a song tao. Yeah.
Song tao bouncing down the mountain. I remember this distinctively. After this beautiful day, we were dirty, wet, happy. But this truck was just so bouncy. And I knew we were on the edge of a mountain on this road, and you could look out the side and you could see the valleys with the trees in rows,
Right.
And I was we could just go flying out of this thing, and I just distinctively remember that truck ride, just the bouncing, and just worrying that Mom was gonna pop out of the truck or something, and I was holding on to the little post, and I guess maybe you got used to that sort of thing, but that was a very memorable.
I've been on scary moments like that. One time, in fact, nowadays I think that there's a gondola in Myanmar all the way up from Kinpun Base Camp to Mount Chaktio, where the Golden Rock is. But the day that I went there was the only time that I've been on public transportation where I thought that there was at least a 50% chance or greater that I was not going to make it. We were on this truck. It was kind of like a songtail, but it wasn't covered. It was just, we were in the back of this big pickup truck, kind of chugging slowly up this mountain. But it was rainy and it was misty, and you couldn't see more than genuinely 5 feet in front of your face. And I was like, we're just going to go flying off the mountain. We are going to drive off the mountain, and that's it. And it took so long to get to the top because we were going so slow, and we had to keep pulling over and allowing the trucks going down to kind of inch their way past us. When we got to the top, we could barely even see the Golden Rock. We saw no views. It was just too foggy and misty. Just had like a beer and went to bed.
Risking your life for nothing.
Pretty much, yeah. That's not one of mine. That is not on my list.
Tell us about this. One I really think you should tell us about is when you were on the bus that flooded.
Oh,
that was crazy to me.
Yeah, that was in Myanmar as well. That was actually on the same trip. That was going from Yangon to Kinpun base camp. We just started out. We had to trudge through the water to get to the bus. You know, the water was up to our feet, and the bus just took off, and it just started going, and it was like nobody cared. You know what? And there were points where we would go down kind of a dip, and the water would come up much higher, like up to our ankles. And, you know, when you're on a bus, you're already, you know, like 3 feet off the ground, right? So the water was quite deep at this point. I was like, man, all of our luggage is going to be destroyed. It's going to be terrible. But it was fine. Everything ended up being fine. When I think back on that entire Myanmar adventure was one disaster after another.
Well, you were there during monsoon season, right? So it was just all wet.
You're right. I had forgotten about that one. You're right. The bus.
I love the video of that. I remember it. You and Pinky, and you're just watching the waters climb up the stairs inside of the bus.
It's like you can't do anything at that point. You know?
Yeah. You're a captive audience.
You really are.
I have one more, and then we have to say our list of to do. Okay? Let me say one more, if that's all right. Another complaint, but also what's the opposite of complaint? Commendation? No. Compliment? Well, I would like
an accolade.
An accolade. I would like to bestow an accolade upon the public transport system of Berlin, which is where I was, was studying during college, because it's so nice. They have on the weekends a subway that goes 24 hours a day, which is phenomenal, especially when you consider that it's like an ancient system, and they like somehow mush together the east and the western lines. And it's a little slow, but like it goes everywhere, and you can use it like all night long, on holidays and weekends, which is really phenomenal. And it's always on time. And in Israel, we kind of laugh because the buses are not on time. But my teacher in my Hebrew school, he's always like making fun of the Germans for their like squareness. And he's like, yeah, in Germany, you have like signs at the bus station telling you how many seconds until the bus. And like in Israel, we're lucky if like it arrives like within like the hour that it's supposed to arrive. I remember one time in Germany, I had the most disastrous experience getting home because it was like a Wednesday, so it wasn't the weekend. And I had gone out like to a bar with the ones I was working with. Our boss was like, she was like very proud of the work we had done on a project,
right,
on the internship. And she was like, I'll take you guys out and we'll celebrate. And so I went with them. And like the last train was going at like 11:30 or something, and I was only late by 20 minutes. And so I was like, how do I get home? And I saw that I could take like 4 buses to get home because I was staying with the host family like way out in the boonies, in like the northern western part of the Berlin, like where the lakes are. And I saw I had to take like 4 buses, and it would take me like 3 hours. But I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't sleep on the street in the middle of, the winter in Berlin, or any time really, but especially not the winter. And I certainly didn't want to stand at bus stations in the middle of the winter, but what could I do? So I had my huge trench coat, and I waited for my bus like Bernie on election, on the inauguration day, I guess, the meme. And that's how I sat. I really did. Yeah. And I got on the first bus. I got on the second bus. I had to wait like 20 minutes between each bus. I got on the second bus. It was a big old double-decker bus. But the bus was so full, and the bus driver, like a good German, was following the rules. And she was like, this bus has too many people. I'm not driving until some of you get off. And who's going to get off the bus? It's like, at this point, it's after midnight. People just want to go home.
Yeah.
And who's going to get off the bus? You know, if some people are allowed to stay and some people are allowed to go, nobody's going to make that self-sacrifice. And so she's like yelling at people, like, until like a certain number of you get off, we're not going anywhere. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, who's going to leave? I'm not going to leave. Like, I'm just one person. Like, I'm not going to go anywhere. You know, so nobody goes anywhere. And we're there for like, I swear, like 20 minutes, and I give up. And I'm like, okay, I'll take another bus. I wait for it. I find another bus. It takes me to another station. But by the time I get there, I miss the connection I planned to take. And I see the bus, and I'm like, oh, that's the bus. And so I'm running after it to no avail. And it's like 2 a.m. at this point. And I have class the next day. And then I see that like the next bus won't be for like 45 minutes. And
oh my gosh,
I don't know what to do. I don't even have money for a taxi, to be quite honest with you. And so I like call mom, and I'm like, Mom, can you send me money for a taxi? Like, it's the middle of the night. And she was worried. She's like, what are you doing? Like, are you okay? And I was like, it's fine. I just missed the bus. And so finally I get a taxi, waste too much money, and go to bed. And it took me like 3 or 4 hours to get home. It was like 25 kilometers, right? And I was like, I could drive that in like 20 minutes, you know, if I had the Texas highway system. I used to drive like half that distance just to go to high school.
Wow. You know what? I'm proud that I've lived abroad for 9 years, and I've never had to call mom in the middle of the night for transportation help.
I will say, though, I was a kid.
Like I said, good adventures start when things go wrong. I've just got one more that I'm going to share with you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
This one is pictographic. So I'm going to need you to open Messenger because I'm going to share you 2 pictures.
Okay.
And I just want to get your reaction to what you see.
Okay, so it's like a little, a gazebo on telephone wires.
Pretty much.
Over a river.
Yeah, this is at Bangpa Inn, the Summer Palace, just south of Ayutthaya, kind of between Bangkok and Ayutthaya, the King's Summer Palace. And when you visit there, you got to get over to the palace itself. And there's this really cool temple. It's actually in the Gothic style. It looks exactly like a Catholic church or an Anglican church.
I've seen, you showed me, I remember you showed us the pictures.
Complete with stained glass and everything. So if you want to get over to this little temple, you've got to take this very rickety, swinging platform that's suspended over this river.
I'm looking at the picture, and it's really beautiful. Blue skies. I can see the spire, I think, of the temple. It looks a little bit like a church. And some pretty white buildings with red roofs, a very beautiful station. And if it wasn't like hanging over the river, the little gazebo thing would be very beautiful and cozy. And yeah, it's just on the wire. It just looks so fragile.
But, you know, you were like, well, okay, we're 10 feet over the water. We're probably going to be fine. Yeah, so that's mine, just because it was such a kind of odd way to get across the river. Instead of building a bridge or anything like that, you had this tiny,
or
like...
just like a little boat.
Yeah, or a boat or something like that. You had this tiny little, like, gondola.
I will just conclude by saying that it reminds me of something I saw in Jerusalem. Well, until the late 60s, Jordan occupied or controlled the West Bank and part of Jerusalem. And there was a war with Jordan and Israel. And they had this little box, it still exists, over one of the hills between like the part that was controlled by Jordan and the part that was controlled by Israel, who was enemies and who would exchange, you know, casualties from time to time, which is very sad. And who were at war. There was like this little metal box on like a telephone wire type thing. And like the soldiers used to sit in it and like go across. And like it still hangs there. You know, man. And so when we were touring the city, they showed us. And I was like, I can't imagine like you're really high up. And you're just sitting in like a carton, like in the grocery store, you know, like, and you're just going, ooh. And it reminds me of that now that I think of it. But what you have looks a little bit less scary.
Well, ours was not so high up. You would not have gotten that injured if it fell. And I don't think the river was probably all that deep at that point either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. So I've got a tiny trivia quiz for you. Do you know What is the world's longest metro system?
Oh, wow. I feel like I've heard this before. It's not the London Underground, is it?
No, it's not. That was one of the first, but that's not the longest. I would say you can probably guess this within 5 guesses.
Okay, Tokyo.
No?
Beijing. Seoul.
Seoul. Yes, it is Seoul. And it is 940 kilometers.
That's pretty cool.
Okay, that's pretty easy. I guarantee you are not going to get this one, even if I give you a million guesses.
Let's hear it.
What is the world's shortest metro line?
Well, there is between like Times Square and like I don't know what, like one of the avenues in New York, this tiny little connecting line. Do you know about that? I think we've been on it together. But I guess that's not it.
We might have. That's not it. Well, I guess it kind of depends on how you define it.
My other guess is that I know in Fort Worth, I think it was like, was there a department store called Woolworth or something like this?
There was.
There was the little subway that would go from the parking lot to the department store. Do you know about this?
Yeah, exactly. They were the world's like only private metro line. They would go one station
That's cool.
from the parking lot to Woolworths. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It closed, I think, in like 2000, in the early 2000s. But it was open since the 1960s, and it was a really nice convenience for the shoppers. And it was, I believe, it was free. It was paid for by the store itself. You're right. It was a metro. It was underground. I think it was just one station. But that is not the answer. That is a phenomenal answer. That is an astounding answer. But that's not the right answer.
Let's hear it then.
To be fair, this is kind of cheating because the article I found says this: the world's shortest metro line is in Russia. It has just one station. So this article is about the Omsk Metro. The Omsk Metro has its own logo, its own map. It issues its own travel tokens, but it has just one station. Here is the story of how this notorious, unfinished construction project turned into a popular meme in Russia. So, walking through the center of Omsk in Siberia, you can see a metro entrance with a huge letter M written on it. People quickly shuffle in and out, hurrying about their own business. The only problem is that there is not actually a metro here. It is just an underpass to the other side of the road. So the story here is that back in the 1980s, the Soviet Union decreed every city with more than 1 million people must have a metro. That is easier said than done. So they built one station and then completely abandoned it. And so there is one station that now is just an underpass under the bridge. However, they still they have their own travel tokens, they have their own logo, they have their own map, but they're just one station in Omsk, Siberia. It is such a weird anomaly of public planning. But there you go. So I don't know if you could actually consider that the world's shortest public transportation. You're right about that one in Fort Worth. I'm really impressed that you knew about that. But this article says the world's shortest metro line is in Omsk, and it's just an underpass.
But there's no train cars,
no,
right?
There's no train cars. There's no rail lines. Nothing else.
I hope they get it one day. How about that?
Oh yeah, it's been 40 years. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, I just thought that was very funny. I thought you would get a kick out of that. The article does take a more positive spin. It says, while the city authorities are contemplating what to do with this unfinished project, local residents have turned the metro into a creative space. Young artists and designers now use this metro underpass as a location for conceptual installations on the burning issues of the day. A whole community calling itself Project M has sprung up with the purpose of looking for new ideas for exhibitions in the metro. Thus, in autumn 2020, a sculpture of a large bolt on a floor plaque appeared here, featuring the metro's logo and the inscription, "Thank you for burying 13 million rubles in the ground. 1992 to present?" ?
Wow. It raises questions about is it called ontology? The ontology of what is a metro?
Who is actually buying these metro tokens? If it doesn't go anywhere...
If you were to go all the way to Siberia, if you were to go all the way over there, I mean, I think you would do that. You're the kind of person who would do that, Michael. You're the kind of person who would pay for a passport stamp in the Vatican or wherever it is that you can get a free stamp. You know.
I probably would. Let's be honest. I probably would. I'm going to go to Omsk. I'm going to ride their one station metro.
We got to make our list, and I don't want to make this too long, so maybe we'll try to keep it short.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just tell you, and we can go into detail later. So my list are, of course, the number one. The top of the list is a Wuppertal Schwingbahn.
Right.
The one that like hangs there like it's a little caterpillar on a leaf.
That's in Wuppertal, Germany, right? That is kind of the opposite or the inverse of a monorail.
Yes, and it swings, it hangs there.
Yeah.
And I have always wanted to ride it because it's just so strange and it seems so unnecessary, but so cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. I also really want to go to a place in Haifa. And you know, Haifa is a city in northern Israel. It's what do you call that thing that's like a train that climbs stairs?
A funicular?
Okay, so there's a Haifa Funicular called the Carmelite, and it's been open since 1959, so it's super old-fashioned. I don't think the trains or the stations have been updated. And it has 6 stations. It makes a loop, and it was built at a time when people lived much closer to the downtown area where they worked. You have to look it up because the stations are like stairs, and then you get on from one of them because it's like a stair. You know, the train is like a stair. How do you describe that? You know how a funicular works.
Yeah, a funicular goes up a diagonal direction, right? It goes up via cogs rather than cables.
Anyways, I really want to ride it. And actually, it's the only underground transit system in Israel until 2022, when the Tel Aviv light rail is going to open.
So even Jerusalem doesn't have its own metro line or anything like that yet?
No, they have a streetcar,
okay.
But it's not underground. That's the distinction. The Tel Aviv is going to have an underground system, but Jerusalem has a really nice streetcar. Okay, and then the third thing I really want to do is a cross-country road trip. I know you and I have talked about the Starlight Express from, I don't know, Seattle to Los Angeles or whatever it is, or San Fran to Los Angeles, and I really want to do that. I want to pay the money and get the sleeper car, even though it's a ridiculous amount of money to pay for something that you could fly for much cheaper and much faster, but it seems like such a cool experience. So those are my 3 to do. I think I can do the Haifa one. The other ones will have to wait. And you know, I really do want to make it over to Tokyo.
Yeah.
That's quite high on my list. Not really for the subway, though it will be interesting to experience that myself, because I guess that's a pretty famous part of Tokyo.
You cannot say that you've been to Tokyo if you have not been shoved into the metro by an old man in white gloves at 8 o'clock in the morning. Kyle, thank you for coming on the show today, and you're welcome back anytime.
Excellent, bro. It is so much fun to always talk to you, and I look forward to our next time. And I will continue to be a loyal friend of the pod.
Well, thank you again. Now back to the show.
You told my favorite story.
The girl in the clong.
It's so good. It's so good. It's funny because in the interview, you've told that story so many times.
Yeah.
And I think you're sort of desensitized to it. And you thought it was kind of funny in the first place. and it was funny listening to Kyle because he's like, were you going to dive in? And I was like, he was never going to jump in. Ever. But no, that is my favorite story because it's so funny every time.
And if you've been there, you can picture exactly where it happened and what happened.
And the fact that she still like hates you to this day is amazing.
She's never spoken to me since.
Like it's your fault. Like
she was jet lagged. She just stepped into the water.
I mean,
Splunk.
I mean, I understand, and I've been jet lagged. It sucks. Once you get going, which sort of brings me into transportation.
Yeah.
My first real experience with Thai transportation was those buses. I mean, I don't count the taxi because a taxi is a taxi.
Right. It's just a car.
And so my first one was that morning when we got on the bus. And these are not the buses of the West.
There's like a hole in the floor. The floor's made of wood for some reason.
It was wood, and I'm pretty sure there was a hole in the floor. But it was great. It was a great experience. But I have never, where we grew up, there is no public transportation.
Right.
It does not exist.
No, it doesn't. Our hometown was the largest city in the country with no form of public transportation.
Yeah.
Almost 500,000 people, and not even a bus.
Not even a bus.
All right, James. Well, it's time for our favorite segment, Adventures in the News. This week it's my turn, and I've got one for you. You like cocktails, right?
I do.
What's your favorite cocktail?
A cocktail has to be 3 ingredients, right?
For the sake of this podcast, you can say Cuba Libre or something. Although, does Cuba Libre have like a cherry in it? It's not just rum and coke.
No, it's rum, coke, and lime. So it is 3 ingredients.
Right. Okay, that's a cocktail. That's got 3.
My favorite cocktail, I would have to go with... That's a hard one. Manhattans are good and things like that. Yeah, but typically, if I'm drinking hard liquor at all, which is very, very rarely, I'm typically just putting 2 things together. I love Jaeger so much.
Yeah, I do too. But I don't mix it. I usually just sip it.
See, I mean, I'll do that, but also like a Jaeger and Dr. Pepper tastes like root beer.
Ooh, that sounds great. I've never thought to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We have a friend called the Commodore, and he has a cocktail called Yoda Juice. Have you ever had his Yoda Juice?
Many times.
It actually glows.
It does, and it is... Okay, that might be my favorite.
The Commodore's Yoda Juice. Well, James, there's a cocktail that I'm certain that you haven't had called the Yukon Sour Toe. And drinking it is an adventure. The reason being is that one of the ingredients is a mummified human toe. The history of the sour toe cocktail, a shot of whiskey garnished with a human toe. Though by definition, I guess it's not technically a cocktail because it's just Yukon Jack whiskey with a mummified toe in it. Well, James, here's the story. The Yukon gets real cold. In the 1920s, this rum runner named Louis got frostbite. His foot was frozen solid, and in order to prevent gangrene, they had to chop off his toe with an axe. He placed the toe in a jar of alcohol to commemorate the event. And then he came up with the idea of this Sour Toe Cocktail Club, an exclusive club with one membership requirement. You have to drink the legendary Sour Toe Cocktail. There's only one rule, and it's this. It's a little poem. You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but your lips must touch that gnarly toe. So apparently the health board actually inspects it because it is mummified and because it's soaked in alcohol, and I think they keep it on salt. Other times it's actually safe. There's no bacteria. You're not going to get some horrible disease from drinking this, but it's still very gross. In 2013, a guy accidentally swallowed it and was run out of town. He was run out of Dawson City.
Did they get the toe back?
No, they didn't, but they accepted donations and they were able to get a couple replacements. So they have changed the toe a couple times through history.
I mean, that makes sense.
But people travel all the way to Dawson City to this hotel just to try the Sour Toe cocktail, to join this exclusive club. I'm going to tell you right now, James, I wouldn't do it. Would you?
You wouldn't?
Would you
probably would.
I don't know. Would you really? You would drink the Sour Toe cocktail? Your lip has to touch it. You can't just sip around it. It has to touch your lip.
But I think it's the idea of being part of a very exclusive club that appeals to me. Right now, I would be like, oh yeah, I'd do that. But I think if I got there, I might not.
Yeah. Well, I do like being a member of a club. You and I were still waiting on our invitation letters for the Adventurers Club in LA.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen. I had a college professor that was invited to the Explorers Club.
You got to be real good to be in. The Adventurers Club is more our speed.
It's not like scientific discovery.
No, the Explorers Club are we unearthed the remains of a new type of mammoth. And the Adventurers Club is I was chased by cannibals in Haiti. The Adventurers Club are the Shriners to the Explorers Club's Masons. They're the ones that drive around in funny hats and little fun cars.
But yeah, I mean, as the Sour Toe goes, the fact that I know it's perfectly safe and it's probably all dry.
Yes.
I mean, it would be different if it was like a fresh toe, or like, you have to drink this off this guy's foot. For some reason, like, that's worse to me. Yeah, if they were like, we here's our bartender Jimbo, and we pour the whiskey down his foot, and you got to drink it. And I'm like, see, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
But I mean, like,
I guess you're right. The fact that it's sort of like certified by the health board makes it a bit better.
If the health board, and this is up in the Yukon in Canada, I mean, I think they take their stuff pretty seriously. But it is the Yukon. I know nothing about the Yukon Territory. If someone from the Yukon Territory wants to enlighten us, please do, because I only know it from, like, jokes. Calvin and Hobbes.
Yukon Ho. Yeah.
Yukon Ho.
Oh,
that's
gosh.
A good
anyway,
one.
Well, that's my story for today. It's kind of more of a weird news, but it's not even news. It's just an interesting story. Well, James, maybe next time I'm in the States, you and I can take a trip up to Dawson City. And
let's take a trip to the Yukon.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, as always, for listening to our ridiculous show this week. You can find us on our website, attemptedventure.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at attemptedventure. And as we're getting close to the end of season 1, we're going to be talking about how to manage those social media sites a little better in season 2.
Yeah, we apologize for the, I guess, lack of.
I wish we had a social media manager.
Yeah, we don't. It's me, and that's not a great plan.
As always, you can email us, hello@attemptedventure.com. You can always go to our website, attemptedventure.com, click on the Contact Us button. Whether you have a story you'd like to share, an adventure you'd like to share, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen.
Keep adventuring.